My name is Allison Kreitz. I'm the manager of exhibitions and interpretive engagement at the Southern Vermont Arts Center. And before we begin, I have just a couple housekeeping comments, and I will be introducing the panelists today before I turn it over to our moderator. First of all, I would like to thank Vermont Humanities for their support of this program through the Rapid Response Grant Program. I also wanted to remind everyone that we are recording the conversation today, and we will be posting it to our virtual library on SVAC's website. We'll need a couple of days just to sort of clean up the video file, but sometime next week you'll be able to find it there. And we hope that you listen to it again and share it with other people in your network whom you think would find this a valuable conversation. The other thing is that we, have a lot of speakers today and are eager to hear their perspectives and to get a dialogue going. We also really want to hear from you and hear what questions and comments you have. We will hold the Q&A until the end of the program. So please just, keep those questions in mind. And when we get to that part of the program today, you can raise your hand or you can drop your question into the chat. And we'll make sure to get your voice into the conversation. I put together a few slides about the exhibitions that have sort of catalyzed the need to have this conversation. And so just bear with me while I get my screen going. So these are some installation shots from the two exhibitions on view at SVAC right now. Voices and Portraits in Red, and they are both available to see in our galleries through April 21st. So if you haven't had a chance to see them, I really encourage you to make a visit. Our speakers today are many and so accomplished, and we're so grateful for their joining us today in conversation. First up is Kat Zelbueno. She's an artist who uses video, installation, and performance to address social issues while engaging communities. And this is the Voices project that Kat founded that you were seeing in the earlier slides. Kat was awarded a Fulbright scholarship to focus on domestic violence in Italy, where she's currently earning a PhD in psychology. Nayana Lafon is our other exhibiting artist. And her exhibition you can see right now. She is a domestic violence survivor and citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario. She studied art at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design before becoming the chief curator at the Whitney Center for the Arts in Pittsfield, Mass. Her Portraits in Red series speaks to the healing process for Indigenous women and others. Lindsay Breon is the executive director of PAVE, the Project Against Violence Encounters, which is Bennington County's domestic and sexual violence agency. She also sits on the Community Policing Advisory Board for the Bennington Police Department. She is a licensed social worker in the state of Massachusetts, and her passion lies in community revitalization and the empowerment of women. Lindsay's colleague, Rebecca King, is also joining us today from PAVE. Rebecca is the housing and shelter advocate for PAVE. She is a single mother of two teenagers with a background in geriatric counseling and nursing, and hopes to begin a master's program in community mental health this year. Laura Saval is also joining us. She is a graduate of Vermont Law School. She began her career at Have Justice Will Travel and now works in Bennington and Rutland family courts. She helps survivors of domestic violence navigate the legal complexities of their family law cases, including divorce, custody, child support, and relief from abuse orders. And Mia Schultz is joining us today too. She is the volunteer president of the NAACP Rutland chapter, which covers Bennington, Rutland, and Addison counties here in Vermont. Mia also serves as the Commissioner for Truth and Reconciliation for the state of Vermont, where she collects stories of marginalized people whose voices are unheard, so they no longer feel invisible. And lastly, our moderator today is Elaine Clift, an award-winning writer, journalist, workshop leader, and adjunct lecturer based in the Brattleboro area. Elaine worked nationally and internationally in the women's health movement as a communications specialist, educator, and advocate for over 30 years. Her areas of expertise include public health, gender issues, and international development. And Elaine wrote beautifully about Kat and Niana's exhibits for Artscope magazine when their shows opened at SVAC a few months ago. If you haven't had a chance to read that article and would like to receive a copy, please feel free to email me after the program, and I'd be happy to share a copy with you. So I think I will stop sharing now and turn things over to Elaine and all of our panelists. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you so much for Allison. That was really great and helpful. So I just want to first of all say that when I went to the museum to write, because I was going to write about these two exhibits, I was just unbelievably moved and touched and just, because I work around women's health issues, I have, written a lot about these issues, and I was so pleased to meet these two artists. And so I'm really glad to be serving on this panel. And because I'm a feminist writer and I teach women's studies and things, I'm deeply concerned about these issues. I've written a lot about them. And so I'm so pleased to be able to meet the people that are on the panel and to engage and have everybody engage with them. So we don't have a whole lot of time. So what I'm going to do initially is just direct a question to each of the panelists, and then some general questions to all of the panelists, and then we'll have they can have a conversation with each other. And as you ask your questions, try to address them. So that's the process. I would ask that people try to speak briefly because of our time constraints and because the conversation piece is so important. I want to start. I'm so sad that Niana can't be here. I want to share with you just a couple of lines from the article I wrote about her in her voice and things that she said, so you'll get to know her better. So as Allison noted, she is an Indigenous woman, and she's also a survivor of domestic violence, and she also shared with me, and I said I could put it in the article, that as a cancer survivor, she also told me that art is vital to her healing process. And this is a quote: "Art is medicine to me, for me, and Indigenous cultures, it's medicine. I see the world I do as sacred." And just one other short quote. This is a quote from Niana. "When you've experienced something like these women have, you want to claim yourself again," she said. "You want to speak up and be heard in a safe way. That's why I do the work. I am claiming my own experience and turning it into something positive, and I hope I'm creating change." So she's just wonderful at not only her art, but her deep commitment to this. And if you read the article, you'll know a lot more about her. Like, she doesn't take money for doing these portraits, for example. So I hope you'll try to read that. So I'm going to start with Kat. And Kat, my question for you is, just talk first of all about your work in general and your exhibits at the museum. And also, I really want you to talk about why art is so vital for social change.
Sure, yeah. So my Voices project started just over 10 years ago, and I always work with domestic violence organizations to find survivors who want to talk about what they've been through. And the project basically gives them a voice. And some women have said it's like cathartic for them to talk about it. Other women, a lot of the women that I've filmed have really just wanted to help other women, which I always found incredible. I mean, after having gone through so much, whether it's physical or emotional abuse, they want to reach out to others, and I just find that so amazing. So what I do is I film only their mouth as a way to keep them anonymous, and also as a way to keep the focus on what they're saying. And then all these videos are put into small monitors that then encircle a room. And when you walk in the room, and this is one of the things that I like to talk about, is the videos may be very direct, right? So, I mean, it's something you can maybe possibly see in a film or a documentary or whatever, but my choice of displaying it in this way is specifically to create an environment, to create an immersive experience. So all these monitors surround people when they walk into a space, and all these voices are going at the same time on purpose. to create this overwhelming sense of like, oh my God, look at all these people talking at once. And then again, you have to make a move to each individual monitor to hear their personal story. So, these are all things that were decided, because someone had once asked me, oh, why don't you just make a documentary? But a documentary is like you're watching something over there, whereas this is you're in it, right? So, when you go up to each monitor, it becomes like a one-on-one experience. So these women and a couple of men are telling you their story. They become people. They're no longer just a statistic. And there are studies that specifically show that humans have, a stronger reaction to visuals than to just text alone. So that's an important part, which I guess is answering your other question, with art. In order to have conversations about sensitive topics like domestic violence or other things, art is a good way to have that conversation because it's not so, I guess maybe not so in your face, not so preachy, not so, I don't know, just like statistics, right? It becomes something else. It's another form of, it's another language. And the same with Nayana's paintings. It does the same thing where you walk into that room and you see these paintings with the red hand over the mouth. I mean, it's more of an emotion that you have. So you can feel the problem, not just read about the problem. I don't know if that makes sense.
So can I just add to that, for me, it's also an act of resistance. Art is an act of resistance. Speaking the truth and breaking our silence is resistance. I actually just taught a class on resistance and particularly women breaking their silence. So I just feel so strongly what Kat is saying about the real importance of art and literature and music and every creative form, and to see them as an act of resistance and of breaking our silence and telling the truth. So thank you for that, Kat.
Sure.
So next, I would like to ask Lindsay to tell us a bit about PAVE and what you do, what sort of community partnerships you have, what you offer, so people and and then I'm going to come to Rebecca to add more to that from her perspective working at PAVE. But why don't we start with Lindsay?
Awesome. So PAVE is located in the town of Bennington, but we do serve the whole county of Bennington. So we're a nonprofit agency that has been providing supports to survivors or those impacted by domestic and sexual violence for over 40 years in the county. We started as just a student project from Bennington College that started our 24-hour crisis hotline, and we have grown to have various different programs. We operate a emergency shelter for those that are actively fleeing abuse, and we also offer housing advocacy, which Rebecca will talk about a little bit more and why that's so important. We have advocates that will accompany survivors to court, help them access protection orders. We also have a wonderful program with all of our law enforcement in the county where if they do respond to a call that involves domestic violence, instead of putting that weight on the survivor to reach out to services, they provide us that contact information and we reach out and we offer services. And that has been pretty successful for us. And it also helps us kind of cover the whole county with small numbers. We also have a supervised visitation program and safe exchange, which is something that doesn't often come to mind when we think about domestic violence services, but it allows parents to interact with their children without that stress of relationship violence when it is present. I'm probably forgetting a lot of things we do. We have youth prevention services and a bunch of other things too, but those are our most solid programs. And, we look forward to being able to move more into prevention and also hopefully be able to further support sexual assault victims in the future.
Good. Thanks, Lindsay. So Rebecca, talk about your work and what are some of the sort of issues and challenges around housing and also before I sort of let you both go, I want to ask you about your community partnerships and you know, the people who support you in terms of your funding.
Sure. So PAVE does, I'm the housing advocate for PAVE. As we know, you know, a lot of times when somebody's trying to leave a situation, where do we go? You know, it's hard to just leave. It's part of the reason why a lot of people stay in bad situations. So it's important to us to try to help them get to a safe place, be it long-term housing or getting them into the emergency house, our emergency shelter, or maybe hoteling them if we have to try to get them in, whomever they may be, if they have children with them, safe. It's, you know, housing's a really personal thing for me. I enjoy and love the fact that people come to us for help and, you know, we can offer them a safe place to go. It's hard, as we know, housing is impossible right now for everybody and it's outrageously expensive, which makes it even harder for somebody to leave, right? Because now, how do I afford that apartment? So being that stepping stone in helping them maybe obtain a housing voucher or a job skill, or, you know, going back to school, basic skills that they might not have, hook them up with resources, all that good stuff that comes with leaving such a bad situation.
And Rebecca is selling herself short. She also supervises our shelter program. And one of the wonderful things that she does there is she helps to build community. We found that abusive relationships often isolate you from community connections. And that is one reason why survivors end up going back, because that's their only connection. So when someone enters our shelter program or even enters our housing advocacy program in general, we really try to loop them into community so they have other community connections and support that they feel, you know, they have connections. That isn't the only person in their life. And she does a very good job of doing that.
Pretty sweet. Credit building, that's a really important thing right now. We concentrate a lot on financial building, financial independence. A lot of people don't realize that financial abuse is a thing. I think a lot of times people think that if I'm not being physically hit, I'm not being abused. But there's just so many other ways to abuse somebody.
Another part of our housing advocacy is we will go to view apartments with people. We will go and prep them on how to interact with landlords. Oftentimes there's a power differential there and survivors feel intimidated in those situations. They also might not have ever rented or owned a home on their own. So Rebecca works with them on, you know, the questions that they might want to ask, the things they might want to look for, and the process of that too. So our housing advocacy kind of starts with emergency shelter, but then it follows them to make sure that they are maintaining and they're somewhere safe where they don't feel that pressure of having to return to an unsafe situation.
Good. Thank you. Lindsay, could you just very briefly speak to the importance of community partnership and you might want to talk a little bit about, you know, the continual challenge for resources, financial and otherwise.
So we are one of the smaller domestic violence agencies in the state, even though we cover all of the county. So that's like 17 towns. And right now we have 2 full-time advocates, myself and some part-time staff. So if we did not have community partnerships, we would not be able to provide the services we do. We rely pretty heavily on Have Justice Will Travel for legal support. We partner with Turning Point Recovery Center to provide all types of wellness coaching, not just for those that have abused substances. They do wellness coaching for our survivors in shelter. We also partner, as I said, with law enforcement agencies, with the hospital, and
Bank.
And the banks. Yes, thank you. I knew I was forgetting someone. We have a good partnership with Tri-State Becca, I always
Tri-state
mess
and
this up.
M&T,
Thank you.
tri-state.
Federal Credit Union, as well as M&T Bank and Berkshire Bank, who we are co-sponsoring a women's leadership luncheon this May with. As for funding, we do receive some state funding. We are part of the Vermont Network for Domestic Violence Agencies. So we do receive some state and federal funding, but federal funding and state funding is never guaranteed. So we rely on community donations, and we run an annual fundraiser and fundraise throughout the year, but that kind of is our bread and butter to make sure fundraising from donors, we have flexibility in what we can do with that money, the programs, we can pilot programs with that money, where our federal and state funding is pretty strict.
Good. Thank you so much. That was really, really important to hear. So now I want to come to Laura and hear about your work. And also I'd like you to talk about briefly about some of the myths and assumptions that still prevail around these issues. And I guess in the larger conversation, I would like us to be talking about what needs to be done in terms of the judiciary, the police systems, the prison systems, you know, because nothing is being done right in those sectors, I think, in my opinion. So tell us about, from the lawyer's perspective, and Have Justice Will Travel, okay?
Thank you. So yes, I am the attorney with Have Justice Will Travel for the Bennington office. So me and our paralegal, we cover 2 counties, Bennington and Rutland counties, and we're assisting survivors with any family court needs that they may have. So that includes divorce, custody, child support, and protective orders. So 2 days a week, we are showing up to Bennington and Rutland counties, assisting any plaintiffs with questions that they may have about their protective orders, offering representation. And since we are funded through a federal grant, all of our services that we provide are free to our clients. So that removes at least one barrier of having legal services provided to them without having to put a large retainer down for an attorney. As far as myths, I'm not sure I can answer as fiery as you were there. You know, we work hand in hand with different agencies. So we work with PAVE here in Bennington. We work with law enforcement for enforcing orders. We work with the state's attorney for added support when they're charging various crimes related to domestic violence with the cases that we're with. So we lean heavily on those agencies. I think generally speaking, you know, a tough angle for a lot of clients is, you know, with family court, you're already putting your trauma on display for the judge of describing why is it that you should be the one with sole custody? Why is it that you need spousal maintenance when maybe you don't have any access to the financials, like Rebecca was speaking of financial abuse? A lot of times clients have no idea the assets that are involved in their marital estate, and having a lawyer to help track that down brings them better results in the end when you have a full picture of what is in their portfolio in their marital estate. So having those resources has been pivotal for people to secure protective orders, for people to secure better outcomes for custody, divorce, and generally leaving a marriage with more assets than I think in the past, you know, or without those resources. Their priority is safety. So sign the papers, flee, have as much access to their children as they can. But having a legal advocate with them, I think, lends them to leaving with better results.
Great. Thanks so much. I think all of us, when we get to the all of us conversation, you know, we can talk more about the systems that need reform, you know, because that affects everything that all of you are doing. So I'll come back to that at the end, but I want to be sure that we hear from Mia. And Mia, I want you to, you know, I'd invite you to share what you do and help us understand the unique challenges of Black women and women of color with respect to violence against women.
Yeah, again, I just want to first of all say thank you to everybody who's organized this and put this panel together, and particularly the artists who have, so beautifully articulated or displayed, kind of something that's so sensitive and so important. And it takes a certain vulnerability to put that out there. So thank you for that. And thank you all for organizing that. Yeah, so what do? I think the theme here is like we're all advocates. We are here to ensure that our communities, whether it's our community of the state, our communities in this Bennington or wherever we live, or our community as a nation or as a world, has people in it who care for one another. And we have taken that role, whether it's a calling, quite frankly, to be an advocate. And so that is really what I do, is I answered the calling of, I would say, my ancestors, and to be an advocate for people of color, marginalized people in particular, but all people who are exposed to things that harm them and things that we can as a society change together. So my role is, yes, in particular for the National Advancement for Association for the Advancement of Color People, which is the NAACP. A lot of people do not know that. It's a 115-year-old organization, and the longest serving civil rights organization, in which we use legal and political means to advance civil rights. So what does that mean in terms of this kind of work, and what might experience for women of color in situations of intimate partner violence? It means, being an advocate who listens and believes, because we know that we live in a society that doesn't always believe Black women or women of color. And so we serve as kind of the conduit for believing. And I know that, and then therefore advocating with the belief that we want to make that change for that particular individual or a system, or both. And there's an and, right? It could be happening simultaneously. So I know that was like kind of a circle explanation, but it's all encompassing in the calling to make the world a better place. And so I think we are all here for that calling. And I particularly focus on people of color, but we all matter, and we all need to be heard. And the only way to affect change is to have lots of ways to open pathways for people to be heard. And so I hope to be that person. I hope to be that person in this work in the NAACP. And then in with respect to my job as a commissioner for truth and reconciliation, that's really the impetus for it, is to hear the stories that have not been heard, amplify those stories, and then believe them to the point where we can make systemic change. And so that is really the way that I see my work, is to amplify stories so that we have change, so that we're not just extracting. A lot of times when we hear stories, it's like, oh, that's too bad. I'm sorry that that's happened to you. And then it just goes away. It's like the 24-hour moment. And it's like, oh, I felt bad for that person. But there's no like actual next steps for change. And so I hope that with the commission and our work my work with the NAACP, there are next steps for change. And I know that it helps to have our installations, and it helps to have panels discussing this and being open about it. And it helps to be able to amplify those to really affect change.
Thanks so much, Mia. I want to mention, so now we're going to start the sort of conversation among the panelists, and I want to mention a few topics that came up as I spoke to each of you individually that I think, all of us need to reflect upon. And well, first of all, one is the idea of, reform within the judiciary, policing, prisons, et cetera. We can touch on that. But the other ones that came up were public health, that this is really a public health issue. The need for shelters, which is so far inadequate. The importance of community involvement. That's why I asked about the partnerships. Also a focus on prevention and also how to work with allies at the federal, state, and local levels. Another one was policy change. It was desperate need for policy change at those levels. And again, the continuing issue of funding and resources. So I'm going to just open it up for discussion with the panelists. And so whoever wants to speak, please make sure your mic, your mute is off, that you're unmuted. And let's just, have a little bit of a conversation before we go to conversation with the audience.
So I just want to jump in here and kind of piggyback off of Mia. One of the reasons that I really wanted to have her on this panel is from inside the world of domestic and interpartner violence. We know that women of color are disproportionately affected, and that often when they do seek services, they don't receive them. And when they seek services, they're often met with people that do not look like them. So I want to just amplify that a little. And also when it comes to reform with the judicial system and law enforcement, when women of color do make contact because of abuse with police, they're more likely to have charges brought on them. So reform definitely highlight that. And I want to put that out there. I did mention to Elaine that I really feel like this is a public health issue. And like all public health issues, it's preventable. We know the things that predisposition a community to have high rates of interpartner violence and just violence, interpersonal violence. And we can combat those. Instead of looking at interpersonal violence as a issue in someone's home and not something that really is indicative of a larger community issue. So everyone should go right on the CDC website. You can look it up. It's listed as a community health issue, and there are prevention strategies, and you can read what makes the community more at risk for high rates of domestic violence. So I do think that is something that needs to be more talked about. And now I'll step back and be quiet and let other people speak.
Thank you, Lindsay. I just want to add that if you do read the article that I did about the exhibitions in Artscope, I didn't have a lot of space for statistics, but there are some stunning statistics about these issues with Indigenous women. So we mustn't forget them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And when I say women of color, I mean all women of color.
Mm.
Can I ask, Lindsay, when you said that when these women of color go to the police and then the police turn against them, how in the
Well,
world
so
does that
I mean, if you look from a sociological, social programming standpoint, we know that women of color and men of color are more likely to be seen as aggressors in situations. I have a long history running residential programs, and we often deep dived into this to look at our disciplinary tactics in our residential treatment programs. And it has been found that women of color are more likely to be seen as an aggressor when they're having a mental health issue, when they're dealing with abuse, and pieces like that. So it's a bias. It's a bias on behalf of those in power, and it's something that we just need to recognize when we are providing these services to women and men of color. I know that Rebecca can speak on this too. We do offer, we have men that come to us for services as well. And that barrier is high for men that come for services, whether it's same-sex relationships or not, but that barrier is even higher for men of color that come.
I just want to add to that. This is a thought I've had in my head all day. I don't know if anybody has been following everything in Hollywood right now. But in terms of reform and bringing attention to domestic violence, I personally think that it's really important that and great that more men are coming forward. And like Lindsay just said, we are currently working with a couple men, and over time more men come in. But it would be great if men knew that, hey, like I can be abused too. And if society was okay with saying, you know what, you're a guy, your wife abused you, that's okay. It doesn't have to be the other way. And to break that stigma of the man's always the abuser, because it's just not the case.
And I do think that's important as we're talking about violence against women, because once we realize that this is a women's issue, but this is not a women's issue, this is a community issue. And if we can enlarge in that conversation, it's going to help us to change our communities and embrace a more nonviolent relationship model.
I would
I
also
would love to have,
mention.
sorry, just real quick, I would love to have some of those men be part of the project.
Yeah.
Some of those male voices would be so helpful for someone who, happens to see the project and see another man talking about this and allow them to know this is okay. It's okay to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, I was gonna say, Kat, one of the things that I appreciated about your the exhibit that I experienced was that it really did amplify that this is intergenerational, regardless of only seeing mouths. You can see a certain amount of whatever, you can figure things out, right? Enough to know that this is intergenerational, it's multiracial, it's multicultural. There were several languages that I heard being spoken in your exhibit. And there's gender and sexuality diversity as well, right? So we're not just talking about we're talking about intimate partner violence, right? We're not talking about just male-female relationships. We are talking about all relationships and how that has been proliferated in any kind of intimate relationship, right? And so I really appreciated that about your exhibit. And in fact, I think there was a man in there who was speaking directly about his relationship with violence.
Yeah, he witnessed him witnessing abuse as a child.
Witnessing,
which is an
right,
important part of this. I mean,
which is part of the cycle of violence and how it goes, generationally and stuff.
And he talked about how he became violent himself.
Exactly. So it added to the cycle. What he was exposed to then became part of his life, and that's an important part of the whole totality of the conversation. Especially when we also look at truth and reconciliation, we're not just looking at victims, we're looking at the perpetrators, right? Like, what trauma, what healing do they need, right? So that they do not pass this down and the cycles are broken, right? I just wanted to comment one other thing, Lindsay. Thank you for amplifying the disparities in violence and for women of color in particular, but also the relationship with law enforcement. When you were reading some of the community partners you had, like, right, I'm thinking police, wow, those are not necessarily the go-to for the communities that I work with, right, or myself even. So just noting that there's this particular barrier of safety. And yes, when we call the police, we often become the aggressors, right? We become the focus. Instead of being victims, we are now in a perpetrator role. And just having enough people in advocacy places like PAVE, like Have Justice Will Follow, knowing and understanding that nuance to be able to advocate for women of color in their situation when they are actually being charged with charged with crime, they're being charged in the moment that they're the most vulnerable and that they're the most being the most harmed. And instead of getting the help and support that they need, they're now having to fight for their freedom, right? And so like understanding how that nuance works and ensuring that there are groups out there like PAVE and like Have Justice, and of course the NAACP, because I have worked on a case here and there with y'all in the court system where that has actually happened, where a woman has been accused of being the perpetrator instead of the victim. So it's important for all of us to be the allies to push back on the systems, or the reform won't ever happen. And that is, you know, the impetus of this question Elaine has brought to us is what kind of policies, how do we push policies? How do we push reform? Well, it takes all of us to do that. It takes all of us as advocates to push for that kind of change. And so that means being there, showing up, believing, and then pushing back when it happens.
Can I just add something to that? Everything you've described in terms of the racial discrimination is prevalent in the medical community and the medical establishment. And so, you know, it's really, that's another whole audience for changes and for policy changes and for educational changes in med schools, et cetera. But anytime a woman or a man has to go to the hospital or to healthcare because of violence, or thinking of like doing rape kit, whatever it is, that they really, really need to have an advocate with them. They really need to have an advocate. You know, I'm a doula, and you know, there's all kinds of ways that doulas come into play in situations like this.
Elaine, I very much agree with what you're saying. And I would like to point out that Bennington County, the only place that you can, I believe, I might be mistaken, the only place that you can get a SANE kit, which is what you need to get after a sexual assault, is our hospital. We have a regional hospital, so you have to travel all the way to Bennington. PAVE is trying to secure some funding that would allow us to help with transportation, allow us to have a dedicated advocate to follow up with those cases. We also have lost Planned Parenthood in our county, so the ability to access free, confidential, and responsive sexual health care is non-existent. You either have to go to the emergency room, express care, or try to get into the OBGYN. And we know that for many reasons, you might not feel comfortable doing any of those things. So that ability to access healthcare is a huge barrier for survivors for many reasons, and women in general in the county. One thing that I would like to mention about reform, and I'm sure maybe Laura could speak more about this, is there is a bill in it passed the House, House Bill 27, I believe, and it is sitting in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and the proposed bill would add, to an RFA right now, you have to prove that someone physically hurt you or put you in harm of physical, or put you in fear of physical harm. And this bill would allow you to get a relief from abuse order if you have experienced coercion or like an emotional abuse. So that is something that you can push your representatives, your lawmakers to support, and it's sitting in the Senate.
Yeah, going off of that, I mean, there was a lot of discussion about kids being exposed to violence in the home. And what I experienced time and time again is, for some judges, that does not meet the definition of child abuse. So in Vermont, in my opinion, we have an incredibly high standard of what is child abuse. And so for some judges, just experiencing violence in the home, if dad was violent to mom, that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be violent to the children. And so what we've been exploring more is using domestic violence advocates or experts to help judges better understand that experiencing violence in a home, as we know, is an ACE, right? It's one of those adverse childhood experiences, and that has consequences not only for that child, but obviously their connection with that parent. And I know Bennington County has a great resource of Caring Dads, which I would shout out that program as far as helping fathers who either abused mom or have abused mom or the kids better understand their generational trauma that they're now perpetuating to their own families. And so there are community resources to help that generational cycle of violence, and we're just one of many of those.
Our county is very lucky to have a Caring Dads program. So if someone they can be referred through the court or they can refer themselves, but I think it's like a 17-week program. And they look at what violence you've perpetrated and, where that came from and changing your behavior.
Good.
So I'm going to ask if any of the panelists have anything more at this moment more to say, because I'm conscious of the time and having people from the audience have a chance to ask questions and join the conversation. Before we do that, does anybody on the panel want to say something? I mean, there's so much to talk about. It's so deep and complex and sad and everything, but we do have to watch the time. So anybody from the panel want to say anything else before we kind of open it up to audience?
Just one more thing. I think about often, because I think about all the communities that have been historically and are presently marginalized. And I think a lot of times we don't include people with disability in these conversations, in particular, people who have neurodiversity, because it's so hard to do the communication. It's so hard sometimes to understand and interpret things. So I just wanted to uplift that too is another part, population that is often overlooked when we have these conversations and when we think about reform.
And let me add to that another cohort, which is elder abuse.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. Okay, so Allison, you think we're ready to go for people to put? Well, there's 6 chats. I haven't read them, but I see that there are 6 chats, so there must be 6 comments or questions.
Yes, we've had a few listeners share some personal stories and also kind of commend different panelists for points that they've made. So I'll encourage people to scroll through the chat, but I will, open it up at this time. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat. You can send it to me directly if you want to remain anonymous, or you can raise your hand and I'll try to call on you. And Elaine, feel free to call on people if you see someone's hand raised as well.
Okay.
So I'll just give people a moment, and this is a good time to switch your view back to gallery, just so you can see everyone's faces, and that'll at least help me and Elaine notice hands a little more readily. So let's give everyone just a moment to think of their questions or comments.
Can I just ask a question since?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Kat. Sure.
Lindsay and Rebecca, you guys, I know a lot of people have, when I showed my work, have said, why don't they just leave? Can you quickly answer that question for them?
I mean, look at the housing market. Where are you going to go? Who can afford?
Yeah.
You have to be able to afford to leave. You don't want to, a lot of times people end up leaving a horrible situation into another bad situation because they just didn't have the resources or the means to leave. It's such a situational thing, and it's domestic violence or violence period. I think is so individualized, but especially domestic violence. And where do they go? How do they leave safely? Sometimes that's just not an option.
Agreed. Rebecca hit the nail on the head. We know that one of the major reasons, especially that mothers don't leave these situations, is that they don't want to make their children homeless. There is a lack of shelters, a lack of capacity, and a lack of family shelters, not just in Vermont, but throughout the country. Also, I would put out there that domestic violence is a trauma. Violence is a trauma, and it affects the way our brain works. It has effects on the way that we process things. So just as within any other trauma, there's a process to recover from that. And your thought process is not always, working in the best part of your brain. Your lid is flipped. So that is something that you have to take into account.
And I think too, individually, it depends. Were there threats made? You know, if you leave, XYZ will happen to you. I'll take the kids,
Right.
whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So it's a safety call. And I think too, at least from the legal lens that I bring to the table and working with DCF sometimes, mothers are, I don't want to say punished, right, by the systems of why didn't you leave sooner? But it's a safety risk. You're always on a daily basis, you're judging what is the safe call today to make it to the end of the day unharmed.
And if I do leave, like if I have nowhere to go, what if I have to take my 3 kids and sleep under the bridge with a local crack dealer next to me? Am I safer there, or am I safer in bed where my husband might hit me?
And then I will be reported for child neglect, and my
Right.
abuser will get my child anyway. I also would like to kind of just note the overlap with substance abuse and interpersonal violence. We know that the two often go together, and one of the forms of coercion is controlling someone's, drug of choice. So lots of times, if someone is dealing with addiction and dealing with relationship violence, that can be a reason why they don't leave. They're not easily accessible treatment options, and that abuser kind of holds power over them because of that addiction. So we do see that a lot as well.
And
I
in
also-
particular,
oh,
sorry. Go-
No, just
No, I
real
was
quick.
just gonna
It-
give the
it-
lens of a woman of color or a person
Yeah.
of color as well, right? Like if we're gonna just get up and leave and we're gonna go to systems that we don't trust initially, that aren't going to accept us, or they may take our children away for being vulnerable in this moment. So there's all the what ifs, extra what ifs that go into that process, thinking for people of color to go seek help and the level of trust with the system.
Especially in Vermont, let's be
Especially,
transparent, where systems often are not reflective of people of color. So I think that's a great point, Mia.
Can I
I
can
just
I just
wanted to
read
add-
something just for a second, Kat? Can I just read a short thing that Nancy Hoffman posted in the chat? She says, "We would never ask a victim of any other crime to just leave."
Right. That was a good one. I just want to add just real quick that I've filmed a few women who have said they didn't leave because their husband or boyfriend or whomever was saying they would be reported to ICE if they did. So that was another way to keep them in the.
When it really just boils down to these really strong the power dynamic that's involved in an intimate partner relationship, and then you add an extra layer of power dynamics with people you don't know who have structural power, right? So like, whose power are we trusting in what moment?
Right.
So I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I do want to put a plug out there. Rebecca and I were able to attend a great conference in Boston, hosted by Empath, the Disrupting Poverty. And one of the topics that came up is the importance of housing and the importance of home ownership when it comes to disrupting poverty. And especially if we're thinking about women being able to leave abusive situations, the importance of them being able to access housing and maintain housing. And one way that we can help survivors is to advocate with our local rental providers to start reporting rent payments to the credit bureau so people can build their credit. Credit is so important. There are jobs that won't hire you because of your credit. There are apartments. You can't do very much without it. So oftentimes when survivors leave relationships, they have no credit or they have very low credit scores. So that really would be very helpful for a lot of the people that we serve.
Looks like Faith, you raised your hand. Please go ahead and ask your question or share your comment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison. I just want to say thank you to the panelists and Commissioner Schultz. It's good to see you. I have a question about, so recently I read this article that talked about having institutions like government charged with homicide, in the sense that they are the perpetrators because of the system that they are unwilling to change. I'm curious of what your thoughts are about law enforcement, human services, or other entities actually being criminalized for the abuse that they let continue. Now, I realize I'm asking this question where it lacks nuance, it lacks particularities, but I'm just curious what the panelists think about that.
I think that responsibility often rolls downhill in our work. And that if we were going to address something like that, we would actually have to look at who the decision makers are. Oftentimes, your local police department, your local human service agencies are not who are setting the precedent. We are often not able to have much of a legislative voice due to our funding sources. Or our ability, to continue to operate in our community without being blacklisted. So I think that it's a powerful idea if it's aimed at those who actually have the power to make changes.
And I think to piggyback off of that a little bit, bringing down or holding authorities accountable is really uncomfortable, right? Nobody wants to do that for that reason. You don't want to be that person. So until people get used and okay with being uncomfortable and shaking things up a little bit, until people are okay to do that and are okay sitting with stuff being shaken up and uncomfortable, stuff is not going to change. I'm a super firm believer of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally that's a bit of a slippery slope when we're looking at the individuals instituting the policies of the agency. I think taking a step back, I mean, generally, in my experience, our system is reactive, right, to what's happening and not proactive. But that's an issue with the rules that the individuals have to follow. So I would maybe take a step back of what are the rules and how can those be changed.
Laura, can I ask you, I know that Lisa has a question and as soon as, I finish up with this, but you'll certainly get a chance to ask your question. But I saw your hand up or that you wanted to speak prior to what you just said. Is there something else you want to add, Laura, to this discussion?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Lisa.
Sure. So I think there's been a lot of great focus on the system. But having worked in domestic violence, knowing tons of women, also having volunteered with incarcerated men, these dynamics start in a family of origin, okay? Discounting the woman, heralding the guy. And I know we need to change the system, but we need to start with kids, kindergarten, first grade, because one of the most difficult things for these women is trying to deal with their own families, blaming them, don't leave, not even noticing what's going on. So again, this talk of the system matters, but I'd like to hear a little bit about what can be done with educating the families, because I have it in my own family. So I
think that's where
stood
the
up to
art,
them.
that's where the art comes in.
Yeah.
This is societal and systemic, right? Like this is, it's societal, it's like ingrained, it's patriarchy, it's misogyny, it's all of the things that, we have been fighting for hundreds of years, well, since the inception of this country and beyond. So, but that's why it's important to have art installations like cats and like Naya's, I'm sorry, and to create the awareness to change society. But Kat.
Yeah, I want to say the reason why I'm here in Italy doing this PhD is to specifically work on a video series targeting tweens and teens I want to create this series on social media where they are every day, to do it in a very subtle way to educate them away from these, stereotypical gender roles, away from this idea of masculinity being what it is now, this toxic masculinity. So hopefully with, not just me, but this whole team here that's working against intimate partner violence, and they're talking about not just my project, but other projects coming together to work on the preventative side. And if we don't stop it at the, with the kids, it just keeps going, so we're targeting couples, we're targeting health professionals, we're going to target kids with my project, and we're also going to target men who have been given a warning from the police or whomever, not necessarily reported, but, you know, so like, it's a multi-pronged thing. And I think that's the only way we're gonna prevent anything.
Mhm. At PAVE, we do start youth prevention education in preschool. Our youth educator goes out to early childhood centers. We actually are able to provide more prevention education to the younger age group. Once we hit middle school and high school, it's kind of harder to get into those. I would say though, I think more programming for boys, for young boys, more support in emotional intelligence for them. As I said before, like I don't feel like domestic violence, as much as it is a women's issue, is just a women's issue. And so if we open that up and we look at it as a whole community issue, I think it would definitely affect what you're talking about and how it starts in the family of origin.
Yeah, I
And
think
these
that there's
sports hero,
definitely-
these sports heroes that abuse women off the
Yeah.
team, you know,
I
we've
will
had
say-
horrific
agree.
cases.
I do want to give a plug out there for the Bennington Martins. They've been a great partner of PAVE. We
They're a
work.
basketball team. for
They're a
folks.
basketball team. We have an ABA basketball team. They're great. They let us go talk to the team members. We navigate things with them. We're trying to have a similar relationship with our semi-pro football team, but really having them out there saying, yeah, this isn't cool. Like, that's not how you handle things. But also being available, you know, to have those conversations like, what do I do in these situations? What do I do when my emotions are high? In Northern Vermont, in the Northeast Kingdom, they're pioneering a warm line for people who feel like they might perpetrate violence, that they can call and kind of get support on what can I do? I'm not controlling myself. So
I think though, when we also talk about systems, we think about, oh my gosh, I have to talk to my congresswoman and my senator or whatever. But we can just start in our schools with their policies too. Like they have policies saying that girls can only wear certain things, but it's all good for boys, whatever they want to wear, right? Like little things those little policies that seem to be benign, they send messages to our children. Right. And we have actual more power in our local government than we do, you know, maybe on a state level. So there's a place there to even insert kind of education in your schools by being a school board member, and changing policies from within. And that would impact actually the way that boys and girls see themselves, or even not, you know, the non-binary, all see themselves in general, because these policies, the kids are only acting because these policies and the families, it's a whole big ecosystem that talks to each other, right? And so anywhere that you can poke at it and dismantle it, a little chip at it a little bit at a time, is important. And so I know we talk about systems, I know it's like a big thing, but systems could also mean as easy as and I say that, you know, because I'm always recruiting women and marginalized people to run for school boards and those local municipality places. This is where we can actually affect.
oh, I lost her.
Oh, Mia, I think you muted yourself.
No,
I don't know if you want to wrap up your thought.
I'm done. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm done.
Thank you. And unfortunately we are coming up on time, so we'll start to wind down now. But Mia, thank you so much for that last comment. It makes me think about one of my favorite phrases, which is about your 3 feet of influence. Just, you know, what you can do right here within arm's length. And, you know, thank you everyone for joining us today. Despite the weather, I'm so glad we were able to move forward with this conversation. To borrow another phrase that Mia, you know, put out earlier about making the world a better place, I really want to just express my huge gratitude to our panelists today for the work that they're doing. And Kat and Nayana, unfortunately, Nayana wasn't able to be here with us, but you know, your work at SVAC was really
Nice.
Yeah, it's pushed our institution forward. And I think you helped us cast light on an issue that has national, even international, repercussions and relevance. And I think what we were able to achieve with this panel today was really to bring that spotlight on Vermont and this local area, and hear about existing services and some of the ongoing barriers that people who are suffering from intimate partner violence are facing. So thank you for a fantastic
Thank you.
discussion. Thank you to our attendees for your thoughtful comments and questions. And as I said, we'll be posting this recording on our website soon. So stay tuned. I'll send the link out once it's available. And please help us share this even further.
Thank you so much.
Round of applause.
Thank you all so much. It was really a deep pleasure and privilege to be with you today.
Thank you, Elaine.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.